Let me tell you something that might make you uncomfortable at first, but stay with me because what I'm about to share will change the way you understand intimacy, chemistry, and the science behind what actually matters in a relationship. And no, this isn't what you think it is. Before we dive in, I need you to do something for me. Subscribe to this channel right now and down in the comments write, "I choose knowledge over myths." Because that's exactly what we're doing today. Dismantling dangerous folklore that's been passed down like gospel, replacing it with actual medical science that can transform not just your understanding, but your entire approach to intimate wellness. I'm Dr. Valeria Montes, and for over 2 decades I've sat across from women, brilliant, accomplished women, who whispered questions they were too embarrassed to ask anyone else. Questions about their partner's health, about things they read on the internet at 2 in the morning, about home remedies their mothers or friends swore by. And one topic that keeps surfacing, wrapped in shame and misinformation, involves baking soda and male sexual function. So let's talk about it. Clinically, honestly, the way adults deserve to have these conversations. The internet is flooded with claims about baking soda, sodium bicarbonate for those who want the technical term, and its supposed miraculous effects on male genital health and sexual performance. Some sources claim it enhances size, others promise improved firmness. Some even suggest it can cure erectile dysfunction, increase pleasure, or magically transform intimate experiences. Here's what I need you to understand from the start. Most of these claims range from wildly exaggerated to outright dangerous. But, and this is important, there are legitimate, evidence-based applications of pH balance and hygiene practices that do matter for sexual health. The problem is that truth has been buried under layers of clickbait, toxic masculinity, and the kind of desperation that makes people try anything without asking if they should. What I've observed in my practice is something deeper than just debunking myths. I've watched women absorb anxiety about their partner's sexual performance as if it were their own responsibility to fix. I've seen relationships fracture because neither person understood basic anatomy or felt comfortable discussing it. I've witnessed women tie their self-worth to their partner's erectile function, as though one person's physiology could validate another person's existence. So yes, we're going to talk about baking soda, but more importantly, we're going to talk about why you're even asking these questions, what you're really searching for, and what actual medical science says about sexual health, intimacy, and the difference between solving a problem and creating new ones. The first thing you need to know is this: the male genitalia is not a science experiment. It's a complex system of blood vessels, nerve endings, smooth muscle tissue, and delicate skin that has evolved over millennia to function in very specific ways. The pH of healthy genital skin sits around 5.5 to 6.0, slightly acidic, which creates a protective barrier against bacteria and maintains the skin's natural microbiome. This isn't random. This is your body being smarter than any home remedy ever could be. Baking soda has a pH of approximately 9.0. It's alkaline. When you apply something that alkaline to tissue designed to be slightly acidic, you disrupt that carefully calibrated balance. You essentially strip away the protective mechanisms that prevent infections, irritation, and inflammation. I've had women come into my office describing partners with painful rashes, burns, chronic yeast infections. Yes, men get those too, and when we trace back the timeline, inevitably there's some folk remedy involved, usually something they read online, often something involving baking soda, lemon juice, or other household products that have no business near anyone's genitals. Let me be crystal clear. Applying baking soda directly to penile tissue can cause chemical burns, severe irritation, disruption of the natural flora, increased susceptibility to infections, and in some cases, scarring that actually impairs sexual function rather than enhancing it. But you didn't come here just to hear me say, "Don't put baking soda on genitals." You came because somewhere in your mind, there's a question about performance, satisfaction, or whether there's something more you should be doing to optimize intimate experiences. That question deserves a real answer. The science of sexual function in men, and this applies to understanding your own body too, centers on three primary factors: cardiovascular health, neurological function, and psychological state. Everything else is window dressing. Erectile function, for example, is fundamentally about blood flow. When arousal occurs, the nervous system sends signals that cause the smooth muscle in the penile arteries to relax, allowing blood to flow in and fill the erectile tissue. Simultaneously, veins that would normally drain blood away get compressed, trapping blood inside and creating firmness. This is basic physiology, but it's astonishing how many people don't understand it. What does this tell us? It tells us that anything genuinely beneficial for erectile function supports vascular health: exercise, proper nutrition, stress management, adequate sleep, not smoking, moderating alcohol, managing conditions like diabetes and hypertension. These are the unsexy truths that actually work. Now, where does hygiene enter this picture? Because that's usually where the baking soda myths originate. Someone conflates cleanliness with performance and assumes that aggressive cleaning products must be better. Genital hygiene matters, absolutely, but it's simpler than people think. For uncircumcised men, gentle retraction of the foreskin and washing with warm water is sufficient. For circumcised men, washing the external skin with mild, unscented soap and water is adequate. That's it. No special scrubs, no baking soda pastes, no vinegar rinses, no essential oils, just basic, boring hygiene. The obsession with elaborate genital care routines often masks deeper anxieties. When I ask women why they're researching these topics, the answers reveal so much. He's been stressed, and it's affecting our intimacy. I want to make sure he feels good about himself. I read that men need extra care as they age. I'm worried he'll lose interest in me if things aren't perfect. Do you hear what's happening here? You're taking responsibility for another adult's body. You're absorbing cultural messaging that says your worth is measured by your ability to optimize someone else's sexual function. You're internalizing the myth that love means managing someone else's insecurities. Maturity begins the day you recognize that your partner's body is their responsibility, just as yours is yours. That doesn't mean you can't be supportive. It doesn't mean you can't share information. It absolutely doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you understand boundaries. It means you don't sacrifice your mental health trying to fix something that isn't your job to fix. Let me share something from my practice. I had a patient, let's call her Margaret, who came to see me because she was convinced her marriage was failing. She was 53, her husband was 57, and their intimate life had changed significantly over the previous 2 years. He was experiencing erectile difficulties. She was researching obsessively, trying every suggestion she found online, including, yes, a baking soda soak she'd read about in some forum. Not only did it not help, it caused him painful irritation that made him even more reluctant to be intimate. But here's the thing, neither of them had actually talked to a doctor. They were both too embarrassed. Instead, they were trying to solve a medical issue with internet folklore, and in the process, they were destroying their emotional connection. When Margaret finally convinced her husband to see a urologist, they discovered he had undiagnosed type 2 diabetes and hypertension, both conditions that significantly impact erectile function. With proper medical management, lifestyle changes, and, when appropriate, medication designed for erectile dysfunction, their intimate life improved substantially, not because of any home remedy, but because they addressed the actual underlying issues. The baking soda was never going to help. It was a distraction from the real problem. This is what I mean when I talk about confusing action with solution. It feels productive to try something, anything, rather than facing the vulnerability of having an honest conversation or seeking professional help. But productivity without effectiveness is just elaborate avoidance. So let's talk about what actually supports male sexual health from a clinical perspective, because this information empowers you to have informed conversations rather than enabling you to play amateur urologist. Cardiovascular exercise improves blood flow throughout the entire body, including to the genitals. Studies consistently show that men who engage in regular aerobic activity have better erectile function than sedentary men. This makes perfect sense when you understand that erectile function is a vascular event. Anything that keeps blood vessels healthy and flexible supports sexual function. Nutrition matters enormously. Diets high in fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and healthy fats, think Mediterranean diet, support vascular health. Foods rich in flavonoids, found in berries, citrus fruits, and dark chocolate, have been associated with reduced erectile dysfunction. Leafy greens high in nitrates can improve blood flow. Again, this isn't magic, it's physiology. The impact of obesity on sexual function is significant. Excess adipose tissue increases inflammation, disrupts hormone balance, impairs blood flow, and is strongly associated with erectile dysfunction. This isn't about aesthetics or judgment. It's about understanding that body composition affects every system, including sexual function. Stress and mental health are absolutely critical. The same sympathetic nervous system that triggers our fight or flight response inhibits the parasympathetic system needed for arousal and erectile function. Chronic stress literally prevents the physiological cascade required for sexual function. Anxiety, depression, and relationship conflict all manifest in the bedroom, not because of moral failing, but because of neurobiology. Sleep deprivation tanks testosterone levels and impairs overall health. Men who consistently get less than 6 hours of sleep show measurably lower testosterone than those who sleep 7 to 8 hours. Testosterone isn't everything, despite what supplement companies want you to believe, but it does play a role in libido and sexual function. Substance use matters. Alcohol in moderation might reduce inhibitions. But chronic heavy drinking damages nerves and blood vessels, leading to persistent erectile problems. Smoking constricts blood vessels and is one of the most significant risk factors for erectile dysfunction. Recreational drugs, particularly opioids and stimulants, can severely impair sexual function. Now let's address the elephant in the room: age. Sexual function changes as we age. This is normal. This is universal. This is not a catastrophe. As men age, testosterone levels gradually decline. Blood vessels become less elastic. There may be longer refractory periods between erections. Firmness might not be quite what it was at 25. These changes don't mean the end of satisfying intimate life. They mean adaptation. They mean communication. They mean expanding your definition of intimacy beyond a single, narrow measure of performance. Here's what I've observed. Couples who maintain satisfying, intimate lives in their 50s, 60s, and beyond are not the ones frantically trying home remedies or chasing youth. They're the ones who communicate openly, who prioritize connection over performance, who understand that intimacy includes but isn't limited to intercourse, and who seek appropriate medical care when needed. They're also the ones who understand that both partners' pleasure and comfort matter equally, that sexual satisfaction isn't a competitive sport, that vulnerability can be sexy, that laughter during intimacy isn't a failure, it's a sign of comfort and genuine connection. Think about what it means when we reduce sexual health to tricks and hacks. We're essentially saying that natural human bodies, in their normal functioning state, aren't good enough. That aging is something to fight against with increasingly desperate measures, rather than a process to navigate with dignity and adaptation. That our worth, or our partner's worth, is measured by whether body parts behave exactly as we think they should, exactly when we think they should. This is exhausting. This is dehumanizing. This is exactly the kind of thinking that destroys intimacy while claiming to enhance it. Let me tell you what I wish every woman understood. Your partner's sexual function is not a reflection of your desirability. His struggles are not your failure. Your worth is not determined by his erection. You are not responsible for managing his ego, his anxiety, or his relationship with his own body. What you are responsible for is your own self-respect, your own boundaries, and your own willingness to have honest conversations about intimacy and health. When you find yourself at 2 a.m. Googling remedies for someone else's body, I want you to pause and ask yourself, what am I really searching for? Am I looking for information, or am I looking for control over something that feels out of control? Am I trying to solve a problem, or am I trying to avoid a difficult conversation? Am I supporting a partner, Or am I enabling avoidance of professional help? These questions matter because they reveal patterns. Maybe you've spent your whole life fixing, managing, optimizing, and accommodating. Maybe you learned that love means making yourself smaller so others can feel bigger. Maybe you were taught that a good partner anticipates needs and solves problems before they're even articulated. Those patterns served a purpose once, perhaps, but they come at a tremendous cost. They cost you your energy, your authenticity, your ability to exist in relationships as an equal rather than as a project manager. And ironically, they rarely produce the results you're hoping for because you can't fix someone else. You can only support them in fixing themselves. Real support looks like this. I noticed you've been stressed lately. How are you feeling about our intimate life? Is there anything you want to talk about? Real support looks like, I came across some information about erectile function and health. Would you be open to us both learning more about it together? Real support looks like, I think it might be helpful to talk to a doctor about this. Can I help you make an appointment? Real support does not look like secretly adding things to food, applying treatments while he sleeps, or trying to cure something without his knowledge or consent. That's not love. That's control, masquerading as care. And here's something else I need you to hear. If your partner is resistant to seeking professional help for sexual health issues, if he's embarrassed, defensive, or insistent on trying everything except talking to a doctor, that's his choice to make. You can provide information, you can express your feelings, you can set boundaries about what you need in the relationship, but you cannot force someone to take care of themselves. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is step back and let someone experience the natural consequences of their choices. That's not abandonment. That's respecting their autonomy while protecting your own well-being. Now, I want to circle back to the science for a moment because there's something important about pH balance that gets lost in all the baking soda myths. The skin's acid mantle, that slightly acidic protective layer I mentioned earlier, is crucial for preventing infections. When you alkalize the skin with substances like baking soda, you temporarily neutralize that protection. Bacteria and fungi that would normally be kept in check can suddenly proliferate. This is why you see increased yeast infections, bacterial infections, and irritation after using alkaline products on genital tissue. For women, this information is particularly relevant for vaginal health, which is even more sensitive to pH disruption than penile skin. The vagina maintains a pH of roughly 3.8 to 4.5, kept acidic by beneficial lactobacillus bacteria that produce lactic acid. Douching with baking soda solutions, something that was actually recommended for decades, disrupts this balance catastrophically, leading to bacterial vaginosis, yeast infections, and increased STI susceptibility. The medical community now universally recommends against vaginal douching of any kind because the vagina is self-cleaning and external disruption causes more harm than good. The same principle applies to penile care. Less intervention is better than more, but the appeal of these remedies persists because they promise control, they promise improvement. They promise that if you just do this one thing, everything will be better. They offer a simple answer to complex problems. Human sexuality is not simple. Intimate relationships are not simple. Bodies are magnificently complex systems that don't respond to simple fixes because they're not simple machines. Consider the neurochemistry of sexual arousal. When we're attracted to someone and feel safe with them, our brains release dopamine, the motivation and reward neurotransmitter. As intimacy builds, oxytocin levels rise, promoting bonding and trust. These chemicals interact with our cardiovascular system, our endocrine system, our nervous system, all coordinating to produce arousal and sexual function. Stress hormones like cortisol inhibit this cascade. That's why anxiety kills arousal. That's why relationship conflict affects sexual function. That's why someone can be physically healthy but still experience sexual difficulties if they're emotionally disconnected or stressed. You cannot baking soda your way out of emotional disconnection. You cannot alkalize away stress. You cannot pH balance your way into trust that doesn't exist. This is why I say the conversation about baking soda and sexual health is really a conversation about what we're willing to face versus what we'd rather avoid. It's easier to try a paste than to say, I feel disconnected from you. It's easier to research remedies than to admit, I'm scared about aging and what it means for our relationship. It's easier to focus on physical solutions than to acknowledge, I don't feel seen or desired anymore, and I don't know how to talk about it. When I work with women navigating these issues, and let's be clear, these are often your issues as much as they're about your partner, what I see again and again is this. The intimate life you want requires the conversations you're avoiding. You want more passion. Talk about what passion means to each of you now, at this stage of life. You want better physical connection? Talk about what feels good, what doesn't, what's changed, and what you'd like to explore. You want your partner to take sexual health seriously? Talk about why it matters to you and what you need from him. These conversations are vulnerable. They're awkward at first. They require us to set aside our scripts about how things should be and deal with how things actually are. But they're the only path forward that doesn't involve frustration, resentment, and increasingly desperate solutions that solve nothing. Let me give you another clinical example. I worked with a couple, let's call them Susan and Robert, who'd been married 32 years. Susan scheduled the appointment, ostensibly for herself, but what she really wanted was advice about Robert's declining sexual function. She'd been adding supplements to his morning smoothie without telling him. She'd bought special creams online. She was monitoring his diet, his exercise, his stress levels. When I asked if they'd talked about this, she started crying. I don't know how to bring it up without making him feel bad. He already seems so defeated. I thought if I could just help quietly, maybe things would improve and he'd feel better about himself. Do you see the problem? She was operating from a place of love, yes, but also from a place of assumption. She assumed she knew how he felt. She assumed direct conversation would hurt more than secret intervention. She assumed his sexual function was primarily about his feelings, rather than potentially about an underlying health issue. When they finally did talk, when I facilitated that conversation in my office, Robert revealed he'd been experiencing not just erectile difficulties, but also fatigue, weight gain, mood changes, and joint pain. His doctor had recently diagnosed him with hypothyroidism. His sexual function issues were symptomatic of a treatable medical condition, not an inevitable decline or a personal failing. Susan's supplements and creams weren't going to fix hypothyroidism, but her secret caretaking had been preventing him from connecting the dots and seeking appropriate care because he thought his issues were isolated sexual problems he should just push through rather than symptoms of something systemic. Once he received proper thyroid medication, monitored his levels, and made some lifestyle adjustments, many of his symptoms improved, including sexual function. But the bigger transformation was in their relationship. They learned to talk about uncomfortable things. They learned to share vulnerability. They learned that honesty, even awkward honesty, builds intimacy in ways that silent caretaking never can. This is the work. Not researching home remedies, but building communication. Not optimizing someone else's body, but respecting both your bodies as they are. Not avoiding discomfort, but moving through it together. Now, I want to address something that might be operating in the background for some of you. The fear that if sexual function changes, you'll be replaced. That if your partner struggles, he'll blame you or seek someone younger. That your value in the relationship is contingent on maintaining a specific type of physical intimacy. This fear is real. This fear is valid. This fear is also sometimes accurate. Some people do behave that way. But here's what I need you to understand. If your relationship is predicated on unchanging physical performance, it was never secure to begin with. Bodies change. That's not a catastrophe. That's being human. A relationship built on genuine intimacy adapts. A partnership built on mutual respect navigates challenges together. A connection based on authentic care finds ways to maintain closeness even when specific acts become difficult or impossible. What you're really fearing isn't erectile dysfunction or sexual changes. You're fearing abandonment. You're fearing that you're not enough. You're fearing that the love you've invested in isn't reciprocated with the same depth and commitment. Those fears need to be addressed directly, not circumvented through performance optimization. You need to know where you stand. You need to know that you're valued beyond your sexual availability or your ability to maintain an unchanging dynamic. You need to know that your partner is committed to navigating life's changes with you, not looking for exits when things get complicated. And if you don't know those things, if those reassurances have never been given or demonstrated, then the problem isn't sexual function. The problem is foundational trust and commitment. Trying to fix sexual performance issues without addressing relationship issues is like rearranging furniture while ignoring that the foundation of your house is cracked. The furniture might look temporarily better arranged, but the structural problem remains. This brings me to something I see frequently: women who've spent decades in relationships where they've done all the emotional labor, all the relationship maintenance, all the anticipating and accommodating, suddenly reaching a point where they're exhausted. Their partner's sexual health issues become the final straw, not because of the issues themselves, but because they represent yet another thing they're expected to manage alone. If this resonates with you, I want you to consider: what would happen if you stopped? Not in a punitive way, but in a genuine, "I cannot carry this anymore" way. What would happen if you said, "This is your body and your health. I'm here to support you, but I can't fix this for you. What are you willing to do about it?" The answer will tell you a lot about your relationship. It will tell you whether you're in a partnership or a caretaking arrangement. It will tell you whether challenges bring you closer or expose existing imbalances. It will tell you what's actually possible versus what you've been pretending is acceptable. I know this feels scary. I know it feels like risking the relationship. But consider this: if being honest about your limits and expectations threatens the relationship, what does that tell you about the relationship's stability? If you can't stop managing and fixing without everything falling apart, what were you actually maintaining? Genuine relationships withstand honesty. They withstand both people showing up as complete humans with needs, limits, and expectations. They withstand difficult conversations and necessary changes. What they don't withstand is one person chronically exhausting themselves to maintain an illusion of effortlessness. So when we talk about male sexual health, we're really talking about relationship dynamics, gender roles, aging, vulnerability, communication, and what we're willing to tolerate versus what we actually need. The baking soda is just a symbol of our desperation to control what we can't control, to fix what might not need fixing or might need professional intervention we're too scared to seek, and to avoid the conversations that would actually create the intimacy we're craving. Let me be absolutely clear about one more thing. There are legitimate medical treatments for erectile dysfunction. Medications like sildenafil, tadalafil, and others work by enhancing blood flow to the penis. They're FDA approved, they're studied, they're safe for most people when prescribed appropriately. Vacuum erection devices, penile injections, and surgical implants are options for more severe cases. These are real solutions supported by real science. But they require seeing a doctor. They require being honest about the problem. They require both partners potentially being involved in the conversation about what's needed and what's realistic. Some men resist this because of ego. Some resist because of fear. Some resist because they've internalized messages that real men don't need help or that sexual function is tied to fundamental worth. These are the same toxic masculinity messages that harm everyone, men and women alike. Your role isn't to protect someone from the consequences of their resistance. Your role is to be honest about your needs and boundaries while respecting their autonomy to make their own choices. You can say, "I want us to have a fulfilling, intimate life, and I think talking to a doctor could really help. I'm willing to go with you or help research options, but this is something we need to address together. That's support. You cannot say, I've researched 13 different home remedies and bought supplements and creams and I'm going to fix this because I can't tolerate the discomfort of you struggling or the vulnerability of having an honest conversation. That's not support. That's anxiety management disguised as love. The distinction matters. One respects everyone's humanity, the other infantilizes and controls while creating the illusion of care. I want you to think about your patterns around caretaking and fixing. Where did you learn them? Who modeled this for you? What do you get from maintaining these patterns? What does it protect you from feeling or facing? Often, women who compulsively caretake are avoiding their own needs, their own pain, their own difficult realizations. It's easier to focus on someone else's problems than to acknowledge your own loneliness, your own fear of aging, your own concerns about desirability, or your own dissatisfaction with the relationship. It's easier to be needed than to admit you have needs. It's easier to be capable than to admit you're struggling. It's easier to be the fixer than to face what's broken in your own life. This isn't criticism. This is compassion. I'm asking you to notice these patterns not to shame yourself, but to free yourself. Because the energy you're pouring into researching remedies for someone else's body is energy you could be directing toward your own growth, your own healing, your own life. What would it mean to bring that same dedication to your own well-being? What would it mean to research what would make you feel more vibrant, more fulfilled, more genuinely alive? What would it mean to invest in your own pleasure, your own health, your own development with the same intensity you bring to managing someone else's? This is the shift I want to see in you, not from caring to not caring, but from compulsive caretaking to balanced partnership, from performing love to living it authentically, from proving your worth through service to knowing your worth intrinsically. Because here's the truth. Your worth isn't something you earn through perpetual usefulness. Your worth isn't contingent on your ability to maintain someone else's ego or function. Your worth exists because you exist, period. Full stop. No caveats. When you operate from that knowing, when you genuinely embody it, not just intellectually understand it, everything changes. You stop asking permission to have needs. You stop apologizing for having limits. You stop performing the role of eternally accommodating partner and start being a whole person in relationship with another whole person. And yes, some relationships can't survive that shift. Some partnerships were built on an unspoken agreement that one person manages everything so the other person doesn't have to. When that agreement ends, the relationship's foundation crumbles. That's painful. That's also information. It tells you what you were actually dealing with versus what you hoped you were dealing with. But many relationships not only survive this shift, they thrive. They become more honest, more balanced, more mutually supportive. They become partnerships where both people's humanity is respected, where vulnerability is shared rather than managed, and where aging and change are navigated together rather than hidden from each other. That's the intimate life worth cultivating, not one maintained through secret interventions and desperate remedies, but one built on honest communication, mutual care, and acceptance of our beautifully imperfect human bodies. So let's come back to where we started, baking soda and male sexual health. You now understand why the myths persist and why they're harmful. You understand the actual physiology of sexual function and what supports it. You understand that this topic opens much larger questions about relationship dynamics, autonomy, and what it means to genuinely support someone versus control them. Here's your practical challenge for this week. I want you to notice your patterns around researching, fixing, and managing. When you find yourself Googling solutions for someone else's body or problem, pause. Ask yourself, what am I really trying to control here? What conversation am I avoiding? What need of my own am I neglecting by focusing on this? Then, if appropriate, initiate one honest conversation, not about baking soda or remedies, but about something real. Maybe it's, I've noticed changes in our intimate life, and I'd like to talk about how we're both feeling about it. Maybe it's, I care about your health, and I think it might be worth seeing a doctor about this. Maybe it's, I realize I've been trying to fix things rather than just being present with you. Can we talk about what you actually need from me? Whatever that conversation is for you, have it. Experience the discomfort. Notice what happens. Notice whether you're met with openness or defensiveness, with genuine engagement or dismissal. Notice how it feels to be direct rather than circuitous. Notice whether speaking your truth brings you closer or exposes a distance that was always there. This is how you learn. This is how you grow. This is how you discover whether your relationship can evolve into something more honest and sustainable, or whether it was always dependent on dynamics you can no longer maintain. And through all of this, be gentle with yourself. You've been doing the best you could with the understanding you had. You've been operating from love, even if the expressions of that love were sometimes misguided. You've been trying to create security in a world that offers none, trying to control outcomes in relationships where control is ultimately impossible. That's human. That's understandable. That's also exhausting and ultimately futile. So now, with more understanding, you get to choose differently. You get to choose honesty over management. You get to choose partnership over caretaking. You get to choose your own well-being over performing endless usefulness. These are not selfish choices. These are necessary choices. These are the choices that create relationships based on genuine connection rather than codependent patterns. These are the choices that honor both people's full humanity. This is what medical science, psychological research, and decades of clinical observation all point toward. Sustainable, intimate relationships require honest communication, mutual respect, appropriate professional support when needed, and acceptance that bodies change, function fluctuates, and perfection is not only impossible, but also irrelevant to genuine intimacy. The magic you're looking for isn't in a home remedy. It's in the courage to be real with each other. It's in the vulnerability to say what you need and hear what your partner needs. It's in the maturity to seek appropriate help rather than pretending everything's fine or that you can fix everything yourself. That's the clinical truth about sexual health that nobody's talking about. Not because it's taboo, but because it's simple and we've been conditioned to believe that important things must be complicated. We've been sold the idea that if we just find the right product, the right technique, the right hack, we'll unlock perfect sexual function and therefore perfect intimacy. But perfection isn't the goal. Connection is the goal. Understanding is the goal. Mutual care and respect are the goals, and those don't come from anything you can buy, research, or apply topically. They come from showing up authentically, communicating honestly, and being willing to navigate life's changes together. So please, put down the baking soda, close the forums promising miracle cures, stop researching remedies for someone else's body, and instead, invest that energy in creating the honest, boundaried, mutually respectful relationship that makes intimate challenges navigable rather than catastrophic. You deserve that. Your partner deserves that. Your relationship deserves that. Now, I want you to do something for me before you leave. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, because we're going to keep having these real conversations about health, intimacy, and relationships. Comment below and tell me one thing you're going to stop managing and one conversation you're going to start having. And share this with another woman who needs to hear that her worth isn't measured by her ability to fix, manage, or optimize someone else. We're in this together, learning to honor our own humanity while respecting others. That's the work. That's the path forward. That's how we create the relationships and lives we actually want, rather than the ones we've been told we should want. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being willing to question myths and face uncomfortable truths. Thank you for doing the work of becoming more honest, more boundaried, and more genuinely yourself. That's where healing lives. That's where real intimacy begins. That's where the life you want is waiting for you to claim it. I'll see you in the next conversation. Until then, be kind to yourself, be honest with others, and remember, you're not responsible for fixing anyone but yourself. Everything else is support, not salvation. Know the difference, live the difference. You've got this.